It's time we got started today, and I have a very interesting speaker to introduce to you. His name is Brad Pelsue, or if you're Canadian, it's Brad Pelsue.
Yeah.
But anyway, so, and he has a long and interesting resume. First, it was a very long time ago, like 56 years.
Yeah.
Sounds like, and he was one of the musicians in Colorado when the Jesus, the real, not the movie, the real Jesus experience was going on. And his music runs through his life with that theme. You know, he's been a musician with saxophone player for church groups and churches and all kinds of different events. He had an economic past, but owned a company, a business owner, and I think it was in electronics.
Well, it's telecommunications, yeah. But,
telecommunications.
yeah.
So he's got a long and varied history. Y'all welcome Brad.
Thank you. All right. They that go out to sea in ships, that do business in great waters, these shall see the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep. He commands the winds, and it lifts up the waves thereof. They are cast down into the depths. Their soul is melted because of trouble. They reel to and fro and stagger like drunken men, and are at their wits' end. Then they cry unto the Lord in their trouble, and he brings them out of their distresses. He makes the storm a calm so that the waves are still. Then they are glad because they are quiet. So he brings them to their desired haven. Oh, that men would praise the Lord for his great works, his wonderful works to the children of men. Amen. Well, we've all had a bit of all of that, haven't we? You know, and so this is just another story, and I want to share it with you, but you're going to ask me, why am I here? How did I get here? And it's all about a cup of coffee. Because my wife and I had just moved down here in 2020, sold our business, and moved down here to be with our granddaughters and their parents. And we moved into Lantana over on the beach side. And one morning we woke up and there was one pot of coffee. And I looked at my wife, and you know, that's the moment of choice. Yeah, real love. And so I said, okay, honey, you have this. I'm going to walk down the block and a half down the beach, take my shoes off, and get a cup of coffee at the Morning Glory Cafe, which you probably are all familiar with. And so I'm there watching out the window, and I hear a voice behind me say, well, that's it, isn't it? He said, it's grace and truth. And he said, if you don't lead with grace, you never get a chance to tell the truth. I'm thinking, oh. I looked around, and there's a table with 6 guys sitting there having breakfast and one empty seat. So I listened a little more, and I could tell that these guys are serious believers. And so I went over, and I just kind of invited myself to sit at the table, and there was, it's one empty seat calling my name. And it was only later that I defined that the only reason the seat was empty was because Neil was somewhere else. And this was his Friday morning Bible study on the beach. So after we finished our breakfast, they said, well, would you like to join us next week? And I said, man, I really would. And they said, that's great, but we don't meet here. We meet at the Sun on the Beach, a mile and a half down the road, but they were out of coffee this morning. So that's the saga of the coffee pot. What's that?
That's divine providence.
It is. I mean, see, that's the whole point, and that's kind of what I want to talk to you guys about, because we all have these moments when, it happens once and you say, And it happens twice and you say, oh, you know, and I've got a friend who had an experience of, he actually died and went to heaven and wrote a book about it, so he's back. And his statement is about these encounters with God in real life. And one of the first that I had was at the University of Colorado, and that was 1960 something, when I was a freshman there. And I was new to the faith, and all new to college, and all alone, and thousands of people on campus, and I didn't know a soul, right? And I remember saying, God, if you don't have anything better for me than what I'm experiencing now, I want out. 2 days later, 2 guys from Campus Crusade moved in next door to me. And they introduced me to Campus Crusade and encouraged me to be involved there, which I was throughout my most of my college experience. So, what else was I going to tell you? Well, yeah. And then we had an experience that was really, really something. When shortly after Georgie and I were married, and that's a long time ago, 1967, in that summer, we were out and I was on a business trip. Dad was a very brilliant guy, because he figured if he sent my wife, my new bride, along, he wouldn't have to pay for my trip home every weekend. All he'd have to do is buy some extra dinners. So that worked out real well, and he got a bonus of a granddaughter about 9 months later. But anyway, that it really worked. So we were on a mission from San Antonio, Texas, to St. Louis, where I was meeting with the Southwestern Bell Telephone Company. That's what they called them in those days. And so I thought, well, my old clarinet teacher is now in Tulsa, and that's right on the way, and I'll just call him up and see if we can stop by and say hello. And we did, and in his house that night, there happened to be a missionary couple that was on their way from Denver to Spain. And they told us about this little church in Denver that had sent them out. And we listened to John talk, and he was so enthusiastic about this tiny church, 75 people or so, that had sent them or sending them to Spain, and were supporting them. And he told us about this, how they were 5 families had come from California together to form this, and that really resonated, because I was always thinking about how the Apostle Paul never went anywhere. The apostles never went anywhere other than 2 by 2. So that's a good example, and they came 5 by 5. I thought that was a blessing. The pastor loved the Word. He memorized the Word. He was really a solid preacher. He talked about their shared leadership. He had talked about what a heart for Israel they had. And then he told us about their radio program in Denver, and the next morning we got up and said goodbye, and that we didn't see John and Patty for about 3 or 4 years till they came back on mission, you know, on fundraising. But we've been supporting them for 45 years. They've just retired from El Salvador. Anyway, that's the side trip. We went to a meeting that night, and there were, I don't know, there was a famous speaker in a basement of a house, and in the meeting came these kids, about 10 kids with their tambourines blaring, singing gospel songs, and they sang 3 or 4 tunes, and it lit me up. And I said to Georgie, that music will reach young people. And I come to know that that's not just the music, it's the anointing of the Holy Spirit that comes with it. But the Lord inhabits the praises of His people, and that was a big introduction to the power of music. So then we get back to Denver, and so how are we going to find this church? We know they're on the radio, so I called the radio station. He's listed up the top 5 or 6 radio broadcasters, and that wasn't it, and that was the end of my phone call. And the Lord wouldn't let me get rid of it. So about 4 or 5 days later, Georgie and I were out, and I said, we got to go to the radio station. So we had to look the radio station up in the phone book. You know, ancient days, you don't just Google this stuff. And so it was a real effort to go down there, go in, talk to the radio guy, and he went back, got the name, and gave it to us, and that took us to our church, which was Faith Bible Chapel, and it's not associated with Calvary Chapel, but it was certainly Denver's key, one of the 2 or 3 churches that really had a powerful movement in the Jesus revival, and I got to be a part of that. So, as Bill said, I'm pretty, consistent musician, and I didn't. That didn't lack. Once we got going with the church, when we walked into the church, they had a little choir of about 10 kids with a tambourine and a great piano player and a singer with a lyric voice like Mariah Carey, and her brother has got a 4-octave baritone voice, and they're still friends today. But we went from that little group, over a 14-year period, the church grew. We became involved with Israel in a lot of cool ways, and it was just a great time. I don't know how to explain it, but music was just such a part of what the kids were. The kids were the youth group. They were our kids, and we took them as a choir down in the Indian reservations and all that sort of stuff. So it was great times. Great times. I will move on. Yeah, so, I gotta tell you this story. 1971 or so, about 4 years after the Six-Day War, pastor had asked us, would we join him on a trip to Israel? Yeah, sure, and they were going to pay me pay for the trip. Now, I'm working for my business, but they were going to pay for the trip, and the job was just to create some music and singing while we were traveling. So on the buses and here and there, we would sing. Well, that was all. I even taught the people some songs related to Bethlehem and Gethsemane and stuff, so we'd be ready when we got to places. And it was just a hootenanny sort of music. Well, I knew a couple of Jewish songs. One about Havinu Shalom Aleichem and a couple of other tunes, and I taught them those, not well. We got on the airplane at El Al from New York to Tel Aviv, and my guitarist, because I can't, when you're a saxophone or flute player, you really can't play and sing. So I said, you got to send a guitarist. He said, well, Wing can do it. Wing Jin, our Chinese guitarist from Tucson, was there, and he was a very gifted musician. And so on the plane, we started playing a little bit, and the people would sing, and the Jews, they liked it on the plane. So we had a great time. By and by, Wing and I sang one of these Hebrew songs, and they said, oh man, that's great, and can you do more? And we, this and that. Well, then they started to say, do you know this song? Do you know that song? We'd say, no. And they would write it down. Somebody would write down, transliterate the Hebrew words, and Wing would learn the chords. And then I had a way of cryptically writing down the melody. And we got off the plane in Tel Aviv with a book of about 10 Hebrew songs. And we started singing those in the kibbutzim, and we sang it. I remember we were in King David's tomb, and we sang the Shema, which is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, in Hebrew, right? And and the guides got all upset because the Christians were singing in David's tomb, and our guide said, wait a minute, listen to what they're singing. And it was like, you could feel the presence of the Lord moving in so many great ways. It was a real blessing. Well, as time went on, our business got better and better, and our church got better and better, and we were at 2,500 people on a Sunday morning, and all of the things that you saw in the Jesus Revolution movie, we had corollaries to in Denver. It was just the hippies. I mean, they'd come in, and I remember the day we said, well, BJ, who was always in the front row with his long hair and his long beard and everything, and one morning we came in and he wasn't there. No, he just cut his hair. And so nobody recognized him, you know, no hair, no beard. But that guy's brother was the pastor of that church for 25, 30 years. So 7 years ago, I started to plan for retirement. And something you got to think about is if you're going to retire, is what do you retire to? So I got this wild idea that I would write a book and finally put my ancient history degree to some good use, which my father would laugh at today. And so I had an idea that I would want to write a story that took some of the Old Testament history and write it for American teenagers and take them into the Bible stories. So what I found was they told me, first of all, you got to get the kids into the story. You can't just do it from a 30,000 foot observation level. They got to be involved. They got to have a mission, and they got to have all this stuff. I thought I had a really easy idea until I got, my first interview with a potential writing partner, and it turned into real work. 5 years of real work. But the Crimson Thread, which I've got a book here for each of you if you'd like to have one, was written about these two American teenagers who encounter Yaldar, a timeless guide who takes them through an underground cave network to events in the Bible and historical events to recover a red thread. Only then can the tapestry of time be restored and the kids return to their father. That's all there is to it. So in that, we take them through Garden of Eden, Abraham and Isaac on Mount Moriah, connect Mount Moriah up with all the other events that work Mount Moriah. So I want to read to you in my concluding minutes just a couple of pages from the book. And this is from the early morning of Passover in the year 33 AD. So put yourselves back in time, and you are with Derek and Phoebe. They are the American kids, and Yaldar has just taken him into the court of judgment. Bring me a basin, a gravelly voice bellowed from the balcony just as Yaldar and his two travelers arrived. What is he so upset about? Phoebe wondered. I do not find any fault in this man, the voice continued. A tall, steely-eyed, clean-shaven man stood above them in the balcony. He wore a regal white toga, a sash with a gold filigree that was draped around all over his official tunic. On his right forefinger, he had a gold ring. The man was clearly important, and he was disgusted. He thrust his hands into the basin and then lifted them high so they could see the washing motion. He scowled and then glanced at Yeshua, who looked back at him silently. That is Pontius Pilate, Yaldar said. He rules this part of the Roman Empire. Only Caesar has more power, and Caesar isn't here. Crucify him, the accuser started. See to it yourselves, Pilate railed at an angry crowd. He dried his hands and threw the towel into the basin. My soldiers will help you, but first I will have him scourged. He pivoted back into his palace, leaving the noisy mob behind. Pilate is trapped, isn't he? Derek said. He may have all of the power, but he can't release Jesus. Not without some kind of revolt. Still, how can he pronounce anybody to be innocent and not set the person free? Clear the way. Heavy footsteps announced the arrival of the Roman enforcer. The mob parted, and he strode across the courtyard and stared right at Yeshua. The soldier was the epitome of manhood. Buff, Phoebe thought. His uniform presented him as a force of the empire. The Roman kilt displayed his powerful legs. Leather straps around his calves held his thick sandals in place. After he removed the brass helmet, Phoebe could see his clean-shaven face and neat jet black hair. It was combed to the front and had no part. She studied his dark Mediterranean complexion and his large curved nose. A shiver went up her spine. She had felt it on more than one occasion, but never like this. There was a presence. It was more than just the power of Rome. There was another force, and she felt it. Look at his eyes, she said. Who does that remind you of? Derek studied the dark glaze for a minute. The serpent in the garden, he said. Their eyes are like black fire. Yeah, Phoebe agreed. Pure evil. He wants to kill and destroy. Whoops. Just look at him. I'm sorry, guys. I'm having my trouble with my glasses here. His heart is pounding, and his feet are pawing at the ground like a horse. Or the battle, Derek added. Just look at that whip. Have you ever seen anything like that? It's nothing like our cowboy whips we've seen in the movies. It's got 8 or 9 stripes of leather. That's a scourge, Yaldar said. There are sharp points, metal shards and bones, broken glass, tied into each strip. The Romans say 40 lashes will kill a man, so they will give Yeshua 39. Phoebe's eyes widened. No, she mouthed. Strip him, the voice called. 2 other soldiers grabbed Yeshua's hands and held him high, strapping him up to the stone pillar about 8 feet tall. His body was stretched fully. I'm sorry, guys. Doesn't he know this is coming? Phoebe whispered. Derek, can't he do something? The enforcer let the whip strands fall to the pavement. The metal and glass clattered ominously. And you get the feeling, I'm not going to struggle with this, somehow I'm not reading it well, so you get the feeling. And
Can you show hold the book up for the purpose
Yeah.
of the video?
sure,
The crimson thread. And then
yeah.
it was very. It's a very good storyline. It's compelling.
I apologize. I just, I rehearsed this morning, guys. So just so you know, it's not like I didn't practice. But as we do with music, this is jazz, right? So now we'll break away from the script and talk a little more. I think that's, gives you a little sense of who I am and where we come from. I think looking back, the Lord has been so good. And we came to learn this part of America when we lived down here for a year when our daughter was going through cancer treatments. And that, when we were having a terrible time in our business, but when your daughter is diagnosed with cancer, nothing matters. And I remember one day when I called the banker up, because I was, you know, this is a line, try this sometime with your banker, because when you really need to negotiate, I called him, I said, if you're going to kill me now. I said, you know, if you want to break the business, you can put us out of business right now, or you can do some things on your side to make it work, which he did. Terrific answer to prayer, because when we moved down here, we did have a house to sell and a business to sell, and some things that really have made this transition great, and the people we've met are great, and we're so thankful for the coffee that we have down here. I don't know if you guys got a question or two, but I would.
I thought that was very poignant. I just wanted to give you a
Thank you.